5, 4.
What effect would socialism in America have on our country's national security? We're going to discuss that today here at the Center for Security Policy. My name is Michael Waller, and I'm here with Dr. Juliana Pillon of the Alexander Hamilton Institute and Center President Fred Fleitz. This is kind of a crazy question to think of, socialism and American national security, because we're not a socialist country. But since socialism has all of a sudden become an acceptable part of American political discourse, and a sizable minority of the population actively supports socialist candidates who are openly socialists or who embrace socialism, what does this mean about the future of our country and America's standing in the world? So we're going to spend the next hour and a half discussing this now, because it's not just a political issue for us. It matters about our standing in the world, our military, our whole national security apparatus, where we are as a superpower, and so forth. So we're going to discuss this now with Dr. Juliana Pillon. She is a professor at American University, former colleague of mine at another graduate school, and a senior fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the study of Western civilization. Dr. Pillon grew up under socialism, under the glorious workers' paradise of Giurgiu Dej in Romania. So she has a bit of experience in living this as well, although that won't be part of her discussion. Her latest book is appropriately titled The Utopian Conceit and the War on Freedom. Came out last September and is available on Amazon. Then after Dr. Pillon, Fred Fleitz will make his own comments, and then comment on what Dr. Pillon has said, and then we'll have a good discussion. Fred Fleitz is the Center of Security Policy's CEO and president. He served 25 years in government, in the intelligence community, in the State Department, and in Congress, overseeing the intelligence community, and more recently was Chief of Staff of the National Security Council under President Trump. So, with that, Dr. Pillon.
Thank you, Mike. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm deeply honored. And I hope everybody in the audience will buy my book. No. I would like to start with a very rough definition of socialism. And socialism has meant different things over time. It turns out that a lot of the people who say they're for socialism don't actually have any idea what it means, but just for the purposes of our conversation, I thought I would define socialism as a socio-economic system that turns to government for the provision and or over-regulation of goods and services. And for that, the numbers are in. I'm telling most people, though not quite all, nothing they couldn't find very easily, even on Wikipedia. But most specifically in the Human Freedom Index that is put out by the Cato Institute. And according to the editors of this very fine index, human freedom and material human progress are related. Countries in the top quartile of freedom enjoy a significantly higher average per capita income, about $40,000 per capita income, of 4 times greater than the average per capita income of the least free quartile. Now, being less free in many cases also means being belligerent, because poorer countries tend to be led by kleptocrats and various ideologues who, at their most extreme, end up menacing other nations. So from that point of view, socialism in other countries, of the poor nations, of course, being more overregulated, as I indicated, they tend to be, from that perspective, a national security threat to the rest of the world. But from the perspective of the United States and Western countries more generally, a greater percentage of the GDP going, the gross national the gross national product, GNP, going toward domestic and welfare and otherwise non-public goods means that there is less money to go around for defense. And so we scramble and, oh my goodness, where should we put the money? And there is an increase in American isolationism as in part as a result of these trade-offs having to occur. And so, for instance, in the UK, as we just saw yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, for example, thank God for the Wall Street Journal, it makes me want to get up in the morning. In the Wall Street Journal, we learn that in the UK, that otherwise has, as of today, left the European Union hoping that a new wave of freedom will come our way. But one of the things that even the UK has to contend with is the fact that they are burdened by a considerable degree of government involvement, and thus Huawei, the Chinese company that we all know and not love, has been allowed, as of yesterday, at least partial access to the British market. And this is what the journal says. The worry is for the Brits that excluding Huawei would delay the rollout or increase the cost of 5G wireless. It so happens, now you may wonder, well, what does that have to do with socialism? In Britain, price controls on access to the copper and fiber networks operated by a unit of the formerly nationalized British Telecom have discouraged investment. That makes 5G the best hope to achieve connection speeds and service other countries achieved years ago with older technologies, despite the security risk. Security risk to the UK is security risk to the United States, which is one of the reasons why now the United States is reconsidering some of the intelligence sharing with the UK. If access to Huawei undermines the security of the UK, and you can further explain as an intelligence guru, you can ask these questions for further elaboration of Fred. But let me turn to the least free countries, the most socialist, or we could call them post-communist socialist countries, notably China. I must say, Wall Street Journal strikes again. When I opened the journal this morning, I saw this wonderful article by Dan Henninger that everyone here needs to read, called The Communist Coronavirus. And the coronavirus that everyone is so worried about is so emblematic of what the threat from a non-free country is. And it's so clear. I love the way Dan said that people walking around with these masks are a symbol of what communism or extreme socialism does to a people. But the fact that the virus was not even discussed, it was not even revealed to China's population, let alone the world, until it became impossible to not tell people, only exacerbated the situation. So not only is this a closed society that is endangering the rest of us, it is also it's impossible for it to only take place in China itself. Again, even if this was not a deliberate threat to us, to the rest of the world. In fact, it clearly was not deliberate, because there does not appear to be any good coming out for anybody. As Dan put it so nicely, he said the real China problem is bigger than one trade deal or this virus. He also goes into the trade deal, but not for now. But the coronavirus has focused minds on current course. China is liable to do significant damage to the rest of the world by accident or intent. The intent is part of the ideology of radical extreme socialism. I spent a whole book on this, so I won't go into details here, but you all know that Xi Jinping's self-elevation to Mao status had been in the works for a while. This is, China is so often thought to be, semi-capitalist. Some people call it state capitalist. That really kills me, You use it's not capitalist, okay? Admittedly, what capitalism means is a separate issue, but let's just call it's the opposite of socialism, in the sense that it reflects a belief in free markets and freedom. The Declaration of Independence has clearly indicated what the system of natural liberty is. I'll come back to that later. But to get back to China itself, Xi, I would like to quote for you Dan Blumenthal, who in The Hill wrote, Xi's recent elevation to Mao status was the next logical move for the Chinese strongman who has spent the last 6 years purging enemies, accumulating political power, and re-centralizing economic and national security policymaking. So many people had hoped that by opening up the economy, which indeed did happen, so, there are degrees of socialism, right? But the pendulum went back, as so often is the case when the people in charge, the strongmen in charge, feel that they're losing grip on power. And one of the major threats, a deliberate threat, very carefully organized threat from China, is of course the Belt and Road Initiative. And that is worth a long conversation because so many people misunderstand it. I've even heard it discussed by people who, again, are very, very sanguine about the future of China as a kind of foreign aid program. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I wonder to what extent this more benign narrative about China may have contributed to the chairman of the chemistry department at Harvard to turn spy and treasonous. And that too is a story in the news today, truly extraordinary. That brings us closer, I have just a couple more things to say, closer to where I believe the greatest threat of socialism lies in the United States, and that is to the moral fiber of this country. And who do we think we are, and what do we stand for? One of the big problems with being for socialism, of course, is that most people are for it because they are against capitalism. And I was about to go into some details in my prepared comments, of which the first 25 pages I've already thrown out. You'll be happy to hear that according what I was going to go into greater detail, perhaps later on, into the kind of socialism that is mixed with Islam. But instead, I will turn for the last time to another Wall Street Journal from today. I don't even know why I prepared this presentation before today, because by Roger Kimball, Civilization is History at Yale. You may have already heard from various other sources, because I would imagine that this is news not only in the journal, that the chairman of the art history department at Yale has just announced that the survey course on Western art will be scrapped, and the new one will consider art in relation to questions of gender, class, and race, and it will also ponder art's involvement with Western capitalism. Globalism, gender, class, race, capitalism. He ends, first of all, I have to mention this, that this has been decided not merely by the chairman, but by the Committee to Establish Principles on Renaming and the Committee on Art in Public Spaces, which, of course, to those of you who are historians, recalls Robespierre's Committee on Public Safety. The coincidence is not coincidental. It's so. Just to end, what Roger Kimball says, as he quotes James Vernon, suicide is probably more frequent than murder as the end phase of a civilization. He considers this emblematic of the end of civilization from within. I only have one more thing, and perhaps I can leave it for later. I have the results of this millennial response to a survey regarding capitalism and socialism. The numbers are truly frightening.
Let's hear it.
Well, let me skip to that, because in addition to that, there was one other thing, and that was the fact that capitalism is really a close, intimate brother of anti-Semitism. And I don't think people appreciate the extent to which the combination of anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism contributes to the millennials' mindset of opposing the freedom that has defined Western civilization from its inception. And Hayek, F.A. Hayek, for example, in The Road to Serfdom, and perhaps I can end with that, although I have more during the conversation, I can bring more, but this is just too useful. The fact that German anti-Semitism and anti-capitalism come from the same root is of great importance for the understanding of what happened there. And it would be a mistake to believe that the specific German, rather than the socialist element, produced totalitarianism. And that is critical, because Robert Wistrich, the great historian of anti-Semitism, he said, this is truly the last thing, and I'll be quiet. Anti-capitalist anti-Semitism underpinning radical anti-Zionism, that's what we all hear from the left today, is an integral part of the Marxist-Islamist ideological axis, which seeks to redeem the contemporary world from the sinister plots of American imperialism and the yoke of Zionist oppression. And that is where Islamism comes in, and I rest my case.
So you just summarize the red-green axis.
Oh, yes,
there.
actually. So, sorry.
Well, so basically you covered China, aggressive Chinese socialism, moral fiber of the United States and the American being, Islam and socialism and anti-Americanism, and then anti-capitalism as the first cousin and the sort of brother of anti-Semitism. Lovely. Okay. Fred Flights.
Thanks, Mike. Dr. Poulin, great presentation. Thank you. Well, we know from history that socialism is a failure, that it's failed wherever it has been tried. We know that socialism kills and has killed over 100 million people, that it robs societies of freedom, of hope, of opportunity, of innovation, that it's been an utter disaster. And we know where it's been tried, where it is still ongoing. Socialist societies have backed away from it to bring in elements of capitalism because the system simply doesn't work. It won't allow them to pay their bills, to feed their people, to compete with the rest. Even in North Korea, this is going on right now, where Kim Jong-un is allowing elements of capitalism into the country, which is bringing in revenue. Now, it's not a perfect system, and people who try capitalism are still being arrested in North Korea, but it's being officially tolerated because socialism is such an utter failure. It is a lie. That's why it's so stunning that there's a rise in support for capitalism in the United States, especially among young people. And there was a poll that came out last night. This might be the same poll that Dr. Poulin was going to cite, so maybe we can talk about this later. I'm sorry, this is a poll from 2019. The good news is that the vast majority of Americans do not support socialism. Only 39% of Americans see it favorably. However, among Democrats, 65% see it favorably. Among Republicans, 9% see socialism favorably. Among Americans 18 to 34, they see socialism favorably 52 to 47, and they see capitalism unfavorably. Only 47% see it favorably, 50% see it unfavorably. And then we look at the political scene in the United States, and the leading candidate for the Democratic nomination is Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist. And the other members in the field are desperately trying to echo his radical socialist initiatives. So what's going on here? I mean, in this country, the people who advocate for this, they say they're trying to address inequality, they're trying to address the evils of the capitalist system. Maybe they say this is just typical big government. We're trying to help the people of this country. That's not what's going on. Before I talk about what's being proposed in this country, let's talk about where this country could go if it echoed what's going on in the United Kingdom, where Jeremy Corbyn, who was wiped out in the parliamentary elections in December, but still easily could have become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. This is a radical leftist socialist who also is anti-Semitic, and I like to think that his anti-Semitism could have been the kicker to prevent him from being elected. But Americans have to understand what Corbyn is promoting, because he is idolized by the American left of where they would like this country to go. So I want to talk about some of Corbyn's proposals to understand the modern socialist threat both to our country and to the United Kingdom. Corbyn said he wanted to overthrow capitalism, but he actually was pushing for a vast expansion of state power. And this wasn't just massive spending and taxes. Now, the taxes included 50% taxes on Britons earning $160,000, and the taxes on people richer than that would even be higher. Giving employees, forcing companies to give shares of their companies to employees and voices on their boards, rental caps, banning private school, a new Green Deal, a 32-hour work week, and 0% emissions from vehicles by 2030. This would destroy the British economy. Oh, also nationalization of industries across the United Kingdom. This would destroy the British economy. It would utterly destroy it. Now, the British economy is already in trouble because of elements of socialism that are already there. this would have been the kicker. It would have been an absolute catastrophe for the country. And as Dr. Poulin was pointing out, there is a bizarre development on the far left among these socialists where they are also, for some reason, in line with anti-Semitism. And fortunately, before this election, the top rabbi in the United Kingdom named Corbyn Anti-Semite of the Year and pointed out that his anti-Semitic positions and the people he's associated with is unacceptable for a British official. So if the British people dodged a bullet with the election of Boris Johnson as their prime minister, but we can't rest at this development because this is the leader of one of the most significant political parties in the free world, and he's promoting positions that are not just big government, they're not just typical liberal policies, they're blatant socialism that would destroy a country. So in this country we have Bernie Sanders, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or known as AOC. They're proposing ideas that are not that far off from what we're seeing in Corbynism. And here's some examples of them. Huge tax increases, 15 billion plus in spending that Sanders is proposing. At least $10,000 a year additional taxes for most families. Increases on taxes of families, $29,000 or over. Investment income taxes, capital gains taxes, wealth taxes, a financial transaction tax, increasing the corporate tax rates, reduced tax breaks for IRAs and 401k. And then there are the promises. Medicare for all, we've heard that's something that would cost $30 trillion over 10 years. Cancellation of student debt, the new Green Deal that could cost $93 trillion, and a massive expansion in government. The Sanders plan could cost $60 trillion over 10 years. So this is not just big government, and if you look at some of the other proposals by other leading Democratic politicians, you can see this is an attempt to change the American system, to move it towards a socialistic system. This includes a guaranteed federal jobs program, universal basic income, which Andrew Yang has proposed. Bernie Sanders has called for a separate plan to give all Americans making less than $50,000 a year an annual tax-free check of $3,000. But the issue that I think is most frightening, and maybe you may think I'm exaggerating, there is an attempt on the American left to ban single-family homes because they're racist and elitist, and it would be better if Americans lived in apartments in cities. Now, I think Mike and Juliana know very well how eerie this is because it resembles the dark and decrepit apartments that in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. It also reminds me of Dr. Zhivago in 1917, the movie Dr. Zhivago, when after the revolution, his house in Moscow was occupied by the communists and turned into a tenements because it was unfair that a rich doctor had a nice house. You know, it's not unfair for people to have wealth and money in this country. In this country, if you take enormous risks, there's enormous rewards. There's winners and losers, but there's tremendous opportunity. That's why immigrants still flood to this country, sometimes with just the shirt on their backs, knowing this is a land of opportunity where you really can make it. But if the government takes the fruits of your labor, people aren't going to innovate. They're not going to invest. And what we see now from this class of politicians on the left in the United Kingdom and the United States and other countries is they're not interested in promoting a market system that has proven so successful for so many years. They're interested in pushing a far left agenda and raiding the wealthy, the corporations, to pay for a far left agenda that will destroy this wealth engine that has been the most successful generator of wealth in history, the capitalist system. So I just want to mention 3 quick points on why is it that there has been increased interest in socialism in this country. After the legacy of the evils of socialism, how socialism has led to so much death and carnage throughout the world. First of all, there's ignorance of history. That young people today just aren't being taught history, what they need to know. Some of them don't know the names of heroes of the American Revolution, what happened in the Civil War, World War II officials. They're being taught by left-wing professors and teachers. They're being taught anti-American curriculums. They're not being taught that the United States is an exceptional nation, that we defeated socialism with the end of the Cold War. I think a second reason has to be massive mismanagement of the college and university systems. It's not just that students have huge amounts of college debt, it's that the government is subsidizing colleges and universities, causing the college and the universities to massively raise their tuitions. Students go to school, get worthless degrees, borrowing huge amounts of money, and then Bernie Sanders comes around and says he'll pay off their college debts. And people think they're being left out because we have a system that appears extremely unfair to young people who are trying to go to college and get ahead in life. I think in the end the capitalist system will solve this. I don't think this is sustainable. My guess is that online universities and colleges are going to take off, and that this inequitable and ridiculous system of tuition and college loans that students can't pay off will be resolved. But enormous programs by the government to pay off college debts is not the solution. And the third is societal issues, and Dr. Poulin mentioned that. I think we've forgotten the importance of getting ahead through hard work, and that this is the land of opportunity, and that there are people coming here and taking advantage of this country. And it's really so sad that there are immigrants coming to this country taking advantage of the tremendous opportunities to invest and build businesses and get ahead and build a family. And we have Americans sitting around waiting for government handouts, waiting for their college tuitions to be forgiven by the government. And I don't want to just attack millennials, because I don't think that's fair. My son is a millennial, and when he was in high school, he started a business building computers in our basement. He sold quite a few of them, made a bit of money. He didn't have any special skills in doing this. He just decided to do it. And there's young millennials across the country finding ways to make money through the internet and new technology, but there's too many Americans who have forgotten, or frankly, they haven't been taught about what this country offers, the possibilities of getting ahead through this capitalist system. And I think it is the fault of the education system, it's the fault of the left-wing media, and it's something that we need to educate people about and understand that socialism is simply not the answer to whatever economic ails we have in this country. I think fixing the educational system, which is not the fault of the capitalist system, it is the fault of the left-wing bureaucrats in major cities who refuse to fix the system. So that's my 2 cents on this, that this is a failed system, the system of socialism, that the American system, the capitalist system, I think is the greatest generator of wealth in history, but we need to be vigilant, because there are people on the left, people in major political parties that would like to destroy our prosperity and impose this failed system on our country. And let's hope we stop that from happening. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Fred. Okay, so we didn't coordinate this in advance, but both Juliana and Fred came up with the large foreign threat of socialism, but also it comes right down to the destruction of the American character and American individualism and the American work ethic, as you just applied, and the centralization of government power to where you brought up the Corbyn example in the UK, where they want to ban private schools, so government education for all kids through a centralized, politicized apparatus that probably rewards a politicized labor union that's probably Marxist in its ideology and outlook, and certainly you have that with the centralization of education here. And the non-acceptance of American exceptionalism, which is a really important point. We'll take questions in from those of you who are watching us live, and you want to send in those questions and we'll address them, but I've got a lot of questions for you guys as well. One of them is, let's talk about that poll that both of you referred to, or that set of polls. Juliana, you had some stats handy.
It so happens that I think we are referring to the same survey. It was in November,
yes.
October, November
yes.
last year. Yeah, very frightening set of percentages here. 57% of millennials believe the Declaration of Independence does not guarantee freedom and inequality as well as the Communist Manifesto. So one of the problems is, of course, understanding what equality is about. Many people say, oh, the United States guarantees equality, but look at the inequalities all around us. So, as Fred indicated, the one of the biggest problems today, and you echoed, is that inequality is seen as an intrinsic evil. Quite related to that is the sense that a greater degree of equality in substantive terms, people having similar incomes, as opposed to equality in the way our founders, and coming on the heels of the Scottish Enlightenment, equality before the law, formal equality, equality of opportunity, some people define it, although that can be misunderstood as well. That is simply unappreciated or rejected. Instead, for some mysterious reason, and truly it is mysterious, they have greater trust in government, as if government were somehow pure and without the profit motive. They have no motives but altruistic. So this is one of the major problems with anti-capitalism. That is the sense that having money is tantamount to being evil, frankly. And that is where, if I may sneak in another poll that is related, that perhaps will help us. This is a more recent poll. You're talking about, for some reason, leftism and anti-Semitism are closely connected. It's very deeply rooted. And here's the poll. Self-described liberal Democrats' net sympathy with Israelis from 2017 to 2019 have sunk to 41%, and nearly as many sympathize with the Palestinians. What does that have to do with anti-Semitism? Well, it's anti-Zionism, people will tell you, which is why some Jews actually also are anti-Zionist, and yet they say, well, who can possibly be anti-Semitic? And yet, the way this ideology of mistrusting those who have money, especially money, those who have property, is connected with a hostility to Jews, is what Hayek said in Germany and Austria in the early 20th century. The Jew had come to be regarded as the representative of capitalism because a traditional dislike of large classes of the population for commercial pursuits had left these more readily accessible to a group that was practically excluded from other occupations. As far back as we can remember, the Jews were the ones who were allowed to charge interest. They were the capitalists, because charging interest for lending money is very important, especially for... Yeah, well, exactly, but it was seen, so that's all that I meant to say. That percentage of people who are anti-Israeli are also anti-capitalist, and not by chance.
And anti-American.
And
Well, I think the
anti-American.
billionaires like George Soros, who we could get,
Well,
let's
yeah,
not
well,
get into all of
well.
that right now, but because he's a whole, we could spend more than 90 minutes just talking about that. But some of them are lowercase g gods in the eyes of a lot of these socialists because they're bankrolling these subversive movements.
And Mr. Steyer and others who are one sometimes wonders whether it's in order to gain a little protection for
It's
themselves.
like the Swiss or Germans sending Lenin to Russia on the seal train.
But that's
Well-
another question.
I wanted to
Yeah.
comment on that. This is an extremely important question that the center is putting significant resources behind. We recently hired Dr. David Wormser to head our new program on fighting global anti-Semitism and defending the U.S.-Israel relationship. We've done a number of panels in 2019 talking about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We did a panel at CPAC last year, and on the 12th of February, we are going to have a panel here, Dr. Pollan, I hope you can have, that David is going to chair with Elon Carr, the State Department Special Envoy for Fighting Anti-Semitism. So I hope you like this panel, and you'll tune in on the 12th of February when Ambassador Carr and David Wormser and my colleague Maya Carlin will be here to talk about the surge in global anti-Semitism, and I think it'll cover a lot of the issues you just mentioned.
Great, I'm happy.
This kind of segues into a question I have for both of you, but let's start with Fred. Looking back at, say, Bernie Sanders' political career, we're not being partisan here because there's plenty of opprobrium to go around, but he was this wacko mayor of the most wacko town in Vermont, up on the Canadian border, who supported the communists all his adult life, at least. Then when he was congressman, he was the most extreme. He was among the most extreme, supporting Soviet active measures campaigns, supporting communist revolutions around the world, supporting the Cuban government, then honeymooning in the Soviet Union. And so now here he is as a leading presidential contender when he was the most fringy of the fringe not too long ago. Why do so many American socialists support America's enemies?
That's a good question, and I guess a question I find stunning is how can the American people tolerate this? I mean, they wouldn't tolerate a Nazi who held such positions who supports America's enemies. But I've seen through my career in Washington that people who talk about socialism and the threat for Soviet Union, the mainstream foreign policy establishment and the news media, they write us off as extremists. They've never wanted to focus on the threat from the Soviet Union. You remember the moral equivalency argument during the Reagan administration, where we conservatives must be exaggerating the threat from the Soviet Union. They're just like us. There's a long legacy of people downplaying the threat from the Soviet Union and for socialism and from communism, from the left and from foreign policy experts. And it's taken heroes like Frank Gaffney and Ronald Reagan and John Bolton and Dick Cheney and folks who stood up to this threat and spoke out on it when they were really going against the grain. They were to try to talk about what the evil really is here. I mean, Ronald Reagan won the Cold War, but he didn't do it with the intelligentsia in Washington, who thought we could always deal with the Soviet Union. Why should we be confronting them? How many times was Reagan called a warmonger? No, he was standing up to a movement that wanted to destroy modern society, wanted to destroy our nation. And the fact that Bernie Sanders was in cahoots with these characters, it's just stunning. And the fact that he remained in the political life and continued to gain prominence, and he's so prominent today, it's a sad commentary, I think, on the mainstream media and on academia that they tolerate this.
They enjoy it. Now, but what? Now, so okay, so they support our enemies. Let's say the real fringe, the vanguard, right? Bernie Sanders is the vanguard, as Lenin would have called him. What about now on the national defense issues? Consistently, socialists in America have opposed a strong national defense. How can you explain that if they want to protect the socialist society that they want to build? Well,
If I may elaborate on your earlier question, that will help me answer this one. It so happens that last week, Angela Davis was the Martin Luther King Day speaker at Yale. also mentioned in Roger Kimball's op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal.
And Angela Davis was.
Angela Davis was a two-time Communist Party USA nominee for vice president. She is known, insofar as people know about her, past for for fleeing justice, being charged with a 1970 kidnapping and murder of Judge Harry Haley. The answer to why Bernie Sanders is so popular today is the same answer that would be given to the question, why was Angela Davis invited to be the speaker for the Martin Luther Day, the keynote speech at Yale? Does that not speak wonders? And this is what she said. She became a communist because, quote, the only true path to liberation leads toward a complete and total overthrow of the capitalist class in this country and all its manifold institutional appendages. Now, if this is the mindset, why would you want, or what's the rationale for a defense against a system that promotes precisely this? Now you would say, oh, but the USSR is gone. Well, anti-capitalism isn't gone. And so this, to answer your second question, one of the reasons, there are a couple of reasons, too, I will focus on, for a less than sanguine attitude toward a robust national security. And that doesn't necessarily mean more money thrown at the Pentagon, mind you. More money is not necessarily better, but intelligent, efficient, and that includes also, as you and I know so well, also boosting public diplomacy and disinformation generally, which we have been miserable at. The reasons, as I said, are twofold. First of all, because too many people do not appreciate the dangers that we're facing, number one, and number two, because the hostility to our own culture is greater than ever because the ignorance regarding our own culture is deeper than ever. And that's a nasty mixture.
Just to wrap up on Angela Davis.
Yes.
She was the #2 figurehead of a Russian-funded political subversive entity here. So she's been a Russian collaborator for years, collusion. And those types of people are now popular since the Russian collusion narrative has been pushed off on Trump and his friends. But also it's funny, she didn't denounce when she was at Yale on Martin Luther King Day, Elihu Yale, whose slave trading money founded the university, right? They're keeping Yale as an icon. They're not taking down the statue and changing it.
Well, they might, as a matter of fact. Oh, this is just too precious.
Well, we don't need to, do we?
No, I just wanted to mention that actually the recommended change that Roger Kimball gave instead of Yale was one of the major donors at Yale, whose last name was Dummer.
Call it Dummer.
Call it Dummer University.
Dummer University.
Mike, I hate to beat a dead horse, but as my former professor Anthony Joes once said, no horse is so dead that you can't beat it a few more times. And I wanted to talk, just give you an anecdote about universities. I got a master's degree from Fordham University in international political economy in the 80s, and I had a course on multinational corporations. And the professor, who had a PhD from Princeton, said, look, before we start studying, we got to talk about Marx. Now, we all complained about this professor, and he was fired. That professor wouldn't be fired today. In the 80s, this was unacceptable. I had a similar experience at St. Joseph's University where I got my undergrad. There was a radical Marxist professor. After one course, they ran him out of town after a few weeks. But that's not the way it is right now. And we have to understand that this support of Marxism and anti-Americanism is deeply ingrained in our colleges and universities, and it is driving young people to support people like Bernie Sanders and to be against capitalism, to not understand all the opportunities that are available to them in this country to do well, to take it, to start their own companies, to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and this is where the future FBI agents and CIA analysts and intelligence officers and diplomats, they're all being trained at these institutions. So this is why it has such a profound effect on American security here in Washington, D.C., to say nothing of the changing the whole psyche of the country. All right. Well, now getting back, you both mentioned American character and the work ethic. What would socialism do to, since it wants to destroy the idea of American exceptionalism, what's it doing to literally destroy American exceptionalism and our ability to lead the free world and what remains of it, and resist rising powers like communist China?
What can, this is a very, refine it a little.
Yeah, well, it's on the whole changing of the American psyche. It's a big deal, it's progress, it's progressivism. What are they progressing toward is the question. And what does that progressivism mean to American national defense and American national security and our standing in the world?
Would you like to take that first?
China would like their country to win more Nobel Prizes in the sciences, but it doesn't happen. And the reason, and the United States wins most of them. Europe wins a good number of them. Why doesn't China win them? They're spending enormous amounts of money on the sciences because it is a communist country, because it's a socialist country. There's elements of capitalism, but it isn't just the economy. It's the government dominating every element of society. And when that happens, we don't have the free thought, the ability to take chances and to innovate that leads to great discoveries. We're the freest nation on earth with the best economy. And when you do that, you get brilliant scientists, you get incredible breakthroughs in technology, in industry, in economics. It's no secret why this keeps happening in this country, because we are a great country with a free economy that provides tremendous opportunities, not just for people getting ahead, but for free thought. So when we talk about what would happen to socialism what would happen if we went socialistic, we'd lose this. We'd lose these opportunities for innovation, for coming up with great ideas. Look, we stay ahead of our enemies, not just because we have more money, not just because we have a better system, but we have technological advantages. And we have those advantages because we're a free market, because people are here to discover them, because there's incentive for companies to invest in very, very complicated technologies, and that investment may not pay off. But if it does pay off, that company reaps the benefits. In a socialist system, it wouldn't reap the benefits, and we would be suffering. Our security would be suffering.
And it's not just radical socialist societies like China. Europe doesn't innovate much like it used to. There'd be no Airbus if it wasn't for the French intelligence service stealing everything from American aircraft manufacturers. Notice the similarities in so many of the things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so Israel was not a military technology innovator until it dumped socialism. So I mean, so you don't have to have an extremist Soviet or Chinese example to show the flaws in this and how countries will innovate once they free up. So there's the big question. It's not just the lunatic socialist.
I will address
fringe lunatic.
I will
Right.
address your question. I
Okay.
didn't mean to pass it up
That's all
altogether.
right.
You know, ultimately, what socialism does in small dosage and also in bigger dosage is present a worldview, a Weltanschauung, as we used to call it in the 60s, and we still do to some extent, a Weltanschauung of being taken care of by the government. So whatever needs we have, somebody needs to take care, instead of you can do it. It's your life. And because I came with my family here with no money at all, because of course under communism, when you leave a communist country, you're not allowed to take one penny along, and so there were 6 of us, and first thing my parents did was start to work. I've been reading lately a number of phenomenal books about and by Holocaust survivors. And what strikes me, as you may well know, a lot of Holocaust survivors live long lives, as it happens. I would have thought if you spend X number of years in a camp, the damage to your body, well, whatever damage to one's body, the positive that has taken place is a gratitude for being alive. And what Holocaust survivors, time after time, and people who know them and who have been positively infected by their attitude is, you have a life, go for it. Do what needs to be done. Exceptionalism is not a word I'm especially fond of because it seems to imply, well, like the chosen people, also not very clearly understood by many. The idea, every one of us is exceptional. What the American system, more than any other in history, has been able to do is to create a constitutional framework that offers the greatest possible room for individual achievement. While being a nation as such, it also builds a tradition that we can all, even if we are born elsewhere, like myself, identify with and appreciate. So yeah, what socialism does is undermine all that. I'm hopeful though.
And I would add, the liberal dialogue now, what kids are being taught in school, is not that you can make it, but you are a victim.
Right.
And you are owed something from the government.
Exactly.
And that is really the prelude to this socialist surge we're seeing among the younger generations. They're being lied to in colleges and in high schools by the media, and there's incredible opportunity here, and a lot of them just don't realize it.
Yes.
And let's get some to national appreciation and appreciation for what we have. Can one be a socialist and still be a patriot? Meaning, to love your country and want to put it first? Or is it something, we're just one other country and therefore we're not unique and we're not a leader or we're bad? Can you really be a patriot and a socialist?
Well, sure. I mean, of course. I think that if you ask people who are very pro-socialist, not the hardcore, not Angela Davis, but oh yeah, they'll say, of course I love my country and I want everybody to be equal and I want everybody to be happy. I mean, look, I have millennial children as well, and they're the nicest kids and they want everybody. But you know, not everybody can be rich. There is such a thing as, well, the school of hard knocks. Some people will succeed, others won't. That's just part of living. But it's not necessarily that that pro-socialist attitudes are anti-U.S. They are anti-American in the way they understand America, which is totally ahistorical. So the reason I wanted to address it that way is that I think we make a mistake in questioning so many of these naive people's motives. They are in many cases manipulated by people who are not naive. And they may not necessarily be pro, China or whatever, but anti-American and pro a system that they believe they will run, as is the case, for example, with the European Union, which where the idiocracy, that is to say, the aristocrats who from Brussels often, I think, feel that they could institute a benign kind of socialism.
Happy Brexit Eve, by the way.
Well, let's hope, let's hope.
So-
The jury is still out if this is gonna be a good idea, but what they have stated is definitely, we do not want what the EU has become, and that is a good thing.
So when the EU is sort of a Euro-socialist phenomenon, it started out as a customs union, made sense, and now it's become a super state, right, where the member states have given up their national sovereignty for a series of bureaucracies in Brussels and elsewhere. So, are they patriots anymore in these countries to the extent where you had a strong sense of national pride? You see the Brits pulling out of it. They never gave up the pound sterling, and Nigel Farage last night, the EU shut him off when he waved the Union
Waved
Jack.
his flag.
So this gets back to the question, can you be, in your opinion, Fred, Juliana has one view, and I don't know yours, can you be a patriot and be a socialist?
Well, I want to, you mentioned the European Union. It's worth mentioning because it really is a far-left international organization that European countries have ceded sovereignty to. It's run by an unaccountable bureaucracy. When nations vote on referendums on whether to join EU treaties and reject them, the European Union brings them in anyway. The people of the European Union can't vote for the leaders of the European Union. And I mean, this is sort of government power gone amok. It's one of the many reasons why the British people pulled out of this union. They know it's corrupt. They know it's not democratic, and it is a creeping form of socialism in Europe. But in terms of whether socialists can be patriots, yes, I think they may have a view of our economy and of history that I think is wrong. But I mean, I'm not going to say that Bernie Sanders is not a patriot. I just think he's just dead wrong in his interpretation. I don't think he hates our country. That wouldn't be fair to say. I just think his understanding of history and economics is absolutely bonkers. There may be socialists we can pick out who really are not patriots, but I'm not going to say that about Sanders.
Oh, well, I was saying in general. Okay, so we have different points of view, which is okay. That's what you can do under a free society still. So then you get your soft socialism and your international socialism, which does end up breaking down at least the idea of national sovereignty for the greater good. So the EU is not a voluntary alliance. It's voluntary to get in, but you can't voluntarily get out very easily. Whereas NATO is it says in the charter, it's a voluntary defensive alliance of sovereign countries. So sovereignty is in there, and you can quit whenever you want to. And any sovereignty that you would sacrifice, it's really to help maintain your sovereignty by leveraging that with other allies. But you get socialism, international socialism, which is the Marxism-Leninism kind, but it's also the soft stuff that we see. And then you have, what about patriot socialists who are, say, nationalists and socialists? We've had a bad luck with that in the past in the Western world. Any comments? We're told that National Socialism is not real socialism. I think it is real socialism, and it's a real bad problem.
I have a chapter on that.
Good. Okay. Well, in a nutshell.
Okay. In a nutshell, National Socialism is definitely a real socialism. There are differences among various socialist countries, of course, but ultimately the idea is similar. I will just leave it at that because there's way too much to say. So
Okay.
I'll just give you a short answer.
Me too. I don't want to get into that one right now.
Okay. Well, I did, so I'll stick with it. No.
But I will say just one thing,
Yeah?
because, I really wish that people would take a look at the evidence and not just bandy about, oh, fascism, national socialism, they're all the same, all right-wing, and Nazism, that's all over there, and then the right and the left. The left and right are two other categories that have been distorted. National Socialism, Nazism has been distorted. Racism has been distorted. All of that. The problem is not only to reconstruct history, to try to make it clear that, well, National Socialism was also a kind of socialism, but far more than that. It is to appreciate the extent to which all totalitarian regimes are in certain important respects similar. And for that is the utopian mindset, because the way that anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism, anti-freedom is so often being cast is as all bad, all the evils are listed. And by contrast, there's this ideal, which we don't yet have. I mean, no socialist will tell you, now there's a socialist country I think we should emulate. Oh, once in a while Sweden comes up, then you find out that actually the pro-Sweden folks don't know what Sweden is about.
Too white to be socialist.
Well, that's also true. But also, it's less socialist than it used to be, and the taxation rate on the middle class is out of control. The taxation, so that's another story. But the categories, the simplistic categories that we have running around, essentially are the defenders of certain empirically demonstrated facts, where you will always find some negatives here and there, inequality and so on and so forth, versus this pie in the sky that never has existed, and with all due respect, never will, because of all kinds of reasons.
Do we have any questions from you guys out there? All right. Oh, we have one from Claire.
I don't know how much time we have left, but
Can we use a microphone?
where is the? I wonder. Is that on? I'm wondering if there is enough time to get into the deeply Marxist. We're not talking socialism. This is Marxism and communism. Connections to, for example, the Democratic Socialists of America, which dominate the Democratic Party in Congress, and then the connections, the Marxist roots of Antifa and its associated organizations like Freedom Road Socialist organization, and it's now called Liberation Road. Those World Workers Association. This is in America right now. It is going to be seen all over the campaign trail coming up this year. Can we talk about some of those connections?
Who would like to take that one?
I'm not the expert on that one.
I want to ask you, Claire, did you mean to say this is Marxist, not socialist?
Absolutely, yes.
I'm sorry, Marxist is socialist.
No, I mean to say we should not, oh, I'm sorry. What I mean to say is, I think by soft soaping it as socialism, we miss the reality that what we're really talking about is Marxism. Going back, beginning the foundation, the Hegelian dialectic, how Marx, manipulated that and on through. But I think we should really be using the terminology Marxism, communism.
If you will. Mind you, for Claire, Marxism has a certain resonance. For most kids out of school today, oh, Marxism, oh, great. So they have a Marxist pedigree. I think what you're talking about, and that's a very important issue, and I'm having trouble with your semantics because the semantics has been so terribly misconstrued. Not with the spirit of what you're asking, but just to underscore how difficult it is to address it for the public sector. There is no question that hardcore anti-Western and anti-American efforts that have been spearheaded through originally the Communist Party of the USSR are showing reverberations today. And those particular organizations I'm not especially familiar with, but there are many others, and I cite many in the book, that do indicate those trajectories. There's not enough attention, focus on the organizations behind some of these photogenic people. For example, Tamika Mallory and Carmen Perez and other leaders of the Women's March on Washington, and who are known as the Squad, is it? They are affiliated with organizations that are deeply subversive, which is what I think your question is getting at. And I can't agree with you more that this needs further. Now, mind you, it's not as if this information is terribly private and classified, although there's a great effort to keep the media out of the conversation. It's that there is an insensitivity to the danger that this poses. So,
I wanted to turn the conversation to an aspect of the growth of socialism and the growth of government power, which ends up taking away our choices and taking away our freedom. Now, there's been jokes during the Democratic campaign that the Democrats want to take away your hamburgers. Now, that may seem silly, but it represents an effort to control our lives and to deny us choices because socialists think the government knows best and wants to take away your freedom of choice, the way for you to live your lives the way you want to. And a very good example of that is Brexit. The British people voted to leave the European Union. And what did the left and the mainstream media in the UK do for years and years and years? Let's have another referendum, because they didn't want to respect the will of the British people. They wanted to have another vote until the British people got it right. That is, they did what the left wanted them to do. This is an important aspect of the surge in socialism, taking away our freedom, taking away our choices. So when you talk, Mike, about what would happen if we became a social society, we'd be losing a lot of freedom. Now, I mentioned this example of leftists who want to take away the right for us to buy single-family homes. That's happening in Oregon. It's happening in California. Now, I'll admit the Democratic Party has not formally adopted that idea yet, but it is eerily similar to what we saw in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe, and it's something we need to keep an eye on.
And it's also forcing conformity of thought and action. First, it has to be outward. You can't say what you really think, or you have to tolerate something extreme. Then you tolerate it because, okay, we have to be tolerant, and then you have to accept that extremism. Why? Because you have to, because we're so diverse, and you have to celebrate diversity, and if you don't, you're a hater. Therefore, if you're a hater, you're committing hate crimes, or at least in your mind, you're committing hate thoughts. And if you criticize it, you're committing hate speech. So we get into this Orwellian land of even our own personal matters of conscience become social crimes or even real crimes. And then this gets to these groups then try to marginalize individuals who do not conform, to keep them out of entertainment or out of politics or out of business, or even running your own business on eBay or through PayPal and getting defunded through that, and then pressuring banks to defund people based on their personal views. So it's this centralized totalitarian mindset that's come up through grassroots activists that are funded by socialist supporters.
Elizabeth Warren wants to criminalize digital disinformation during a presidential campaign. Who decides what the disinformation is? I'm sure it's mostly conservative thought.
Sure.
And I mean and we know this as conservatives, as members of a conservative organization, our thoughts being censored all the time on social media. This is just the beginning. If Sanders gets in office, and I'm not taking a position because I had a nonprofit organization, theoretically, I'm worried what will happen to our free speech rights.
Sure. Yeah, imagine that the person wanting to criminalize disinformation is the same person who lied about her ethnicity in order to get privileges and cash for herself.
But if I
And wants to put us in jail for, yeah.
If I may quote Fyodor Dostoevsky here in The Grand Inquisitor, one of the greatest passages of all literature, sometimes people like not to have choices. How often do you hear people say, oh, healthcare is such a mess. It would be so much easier if all the health care would be provided by the government. One, single payer. It's too confusing. The problem is that often choice is not appreciated. The fact is that in the Grand Inquisitor, the great takeaway is that people, under the illusion that they will get bread, will give up choice. Under the illusion. The trouble is, when you have no choice, you also have no bread, and that's what communism told us later on. The cover on my book says, "Freedom, go to hell." In many cases, people are perfectly happy to know what they're supposed to say, what they're supposed to do. And if that costs a little bit of discomfort and fewer choices, well, the government will know which choices are best.
But back also on the national security side of it,
Yes.
you have this ideological conformity even within our own military, diplomatic service, court systems, FBI, CIA, where the same type of thing is going on in there, where we can't speak freely, you can't have a diversity of views, you can't have dissent anymore. It's all totally becoming more and more totally conformist, where independent thinkers or just people who believe in constitutional principles are being held back for advancement or driven out. And you see people at the FBI are punching out left and right after 20 years of service just to get out of there. And it's not the ones who are abusing power who are the ones quitting. Anything to say about that, Fred, on the national security side?
Yeah.
I think it's a big problem. I remember during the Obama years where you weren't allowed to mention radical Islamists. That term had been removed from the lexicon of the U.S. government. There were banned words and phrases concerning threats to our country. What did they use instead? Well, actually, at one point, they tried to remove the word terrorist and replace it with the term man-caused disaster. I mean, this really is Orwellian, that we actually had officials of our government who were spouting such nonsense. Now, fortunately, the Trump administration, to some extent, has reversed that. My concern is that there are too many positions in the Department of Homeland Security, in the State Department, the Department of Defense, who are holding fast to this ideological nonsense pushed by the Obama administration. So I think the Trump administration has a lot more work to do this year to reverse this type of left-wing ideological conformity in national security.
It'll take a long time. And in the military too, even in the special ops community, there's this PC strain being pushed down from the generals. And face it, generals are generally conformist types. You don't see many individualist generals going ahead. Not many innovators become generals. They stay as colonels and retire. So there's a lot of...
Although I do know one.
Yeah, there are a couple here and there, but out of the hundreds that we have.
I don't know that many. But
More admirals than we have ships, but they don't get that way by being great strategists. I mean, they don't even... There's no Defense Department term for enemy or victory anymore. You've got a 400-page DoD dictionary of military terms, and those terms don't appear as defined. So if we don't know who our enemy is, and we can't define what victory is, and then we can't say jihadists, can't say radical Islam and all these other things, and still can't do much of the government. What does that mean for national security? And how does that tie in with this whole Marxist, socialist ideologization of our educational system and civil service and foreign service? I'm going to be wrapping up now. Any more questions from anybody or comments from you that we didn't? There's a lot we didn't touch on.
I think this summed it up well. I'd love to get your thoughts, Mike, on why you think support for socialism is surging in this country. You heard Juliana and I talk about this, but what's your view of this?
People want free stuff. They're educated by professors who, having been a professor for 13 years in a graduate school, I can say most higher education is a waste and a fraud. At one place where I taught, they tripled their tuition overnight just because the accreditor said your tuition is too low so you don't look prestigious enough, driving students hopelessly into debt to become baristas with their master's degree. So it's a scam across the board, and having a bunch of kids in college right now, it's a total scam. That's why they're paying their own way. You've got a centralized government business model in the United States, which centralized government, cash, sounds like socialistic, okay? Going back to the 70s where we had our educational system was in the hands of the states and in the towns in some cases. Now it becomes centralized to support the unions as a sop to the unions with the creation of the Department of Education, stuffed with highly ideological bureaucrats who support socialist agendas, and then forcing this as mandates now on schools across the country. If they want to receive federal funding to underwrite their schools, they have to abide by these centralized guidelines, and this causes us to have kids who never studied the Constitution, never studied founding principles, but they have studied the Communist Manifesto.
Can I pick up on
But
that?
they become our diplomats and our spies and our cops and our judges.
I just wanted to pick up on that because we have a couple of minutes.
Okay.
And I really, really do not want this to be a kvetch session, although God knows there's plenty to kvetch about. But you just said the word Constitution. I really think there's hope there. We just came back with my husband from the Federalist Society Western Division, and oh my goodness, that is a real fountain of hope. If we can get back to the original Constitution that has been distorted and abused out of existence ever since the 1930s, slowly, if we could roll back and get back to the principle that Congress can legislate only that which it has power to do, and leave the rest to the people, leave the rights, the infinite number of rights that we all have to the people, that would be a good idea. And it's not impossible. I'm not suggesting that that can happen, however, without a cultural change. There has to be a will to do that. Enough people need to want to not put up with the things that we've been kvetching about. So let's hope that happens.
Well, hope is not enough, but we do have a nice turnover
Yes.
of the judicial system now, with a record number of federal judges being appointed, and a Supreme Court that's more constitutionalist in its
Right.
in its interpretation of the Constitution.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's a wrap for today. We'll have a set of these because there's so much uncovered, and we did have other guests who wanted to be here today. Would have made the panel too large, so they'll be back for more of this later on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I forgot to ask you if you wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was good. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you, audience.
Right.
Let's get a picture of the
Oh, okay.